welcome Reggie Twigg and Richard Rabin from Abby, who are here to kick us off this morning. So Reggie and Richard, great to have you with us. Excited about having you with us today. I'm going to start with an introduction with Richard here. Richard is the product marketing manager for process intelligence at Abby. He works closely with global enterprise to help them better understand and optimize their business process workflows, bottlenecks, and how to select initiatives that will the most business value with intelligent automation, and most important, how they will impact overall operational excellence. Richard, great to have you with us. And we also have Reggie Twigg here coming from Salt Lake City, Utah, with over 2 decades of experience in enterprise software and artificial intelligence. Dr. Reginald Twigg is an expert in automating document processing applications with digital approaches. At Abby, he oversees the application of digital transformation and intelligent document processing solutions to enterprise markets and clients in industries such as financial services, insurance, transportation and logistics, and cross-industry functional areas like finance and accounting. Reggie, what a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with our global audience today.
Thank you. And I will go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Okay, so I will go ahead and get started. I'm having a few technical difficulties, which just means that things may move a little slowly, but I hope to be able to keep time. So with that little bit of background, let's go ahead and get started on the presentation. And today's topic is both broad and narrowly focused in a couple of ways, and that will become clear through the course of the presentation. And what I want to talk about today is what is happening with digital transformation because of COVID-19 and how COVID radically changed the way we work, the way we do business. But I also want to talk about some areas of digital transformation that became friction points in our efforts to digitize, and more specifically to gear our businesses to working remotely, both being remote from our fellow employees and being remote from our end users and our customers. So let me get down to, let me see if I can get my cursor to work. There we go. So today we will be covering a couple of different topics. The first of which is understanding what digital transformation actually is. Now, digital transformation is one of those topics that is so big that it can mean just about anything. So the purpose of this first part of the agenda is to narrow the scope to talk specifically about how digital transformation is practically applied in businesses. And secondly, I want to talk about one of the particular challenges that organizations face again and again when they attempt to digitize their process. And we'll talk about what it means to digitize your process. And specifically, one of the major challenges that we see in digitizing processes is how those processes handle content. And by content, I mean that unstructured information that organizations use to make decisions every day, every minute in their business processes. And those can include things such as messages and documents. And how do those forms of unstructured content fit into the flow of your business process? How do you automate that, and how do you make decisions on it? This particular kind of information can pose some unique challenges, and for a digital transformation initiative, these are challenges that many organizations are taking head on, but are still having some problems in the way that they're bringing them, making them work, and we will be talking about that. Third, I want to give a little bit of background on artificial intelligence and the specific role that artificial intelligence plays in what we can describe as content-enabled processes. Finally, we'll wrap up with a new look at process, and that is how we understand our processes, discover, monitor, create alerts on those processes, not only based upon the simple things that we've learned how to do, such as workflow and exception handling, but more importantly, that messy part of process, which is the human interaction with the process and the elements of content that flow throughout the process that humans actually have to interpret and make decisions on. My cursor got a little bit fast on me, so let me just jump back. Our first topic today is understanding the new automation wave and how it redefined work in specifically how COVID redefined how work gets done. Now, we're more than a year into the COVID crisis, and many of the changes that it brought about in how we do business, how we interact with our employees, and how we get work done have become completely normalized. And it's fair to say that the normalization of these practices will continue even after we come out of the pandemic. So let's talk about what digital transformation means in everyday life. We see digital transformation all around us. And as we have moved from a workplace environment to the home work environment, we've seen this every day in the way that we just get on with our lives. But back in the days when we could travel, and hopefully those days are returning soon, we learned a lot about rideshare applications. So, for example, a good example of digital transformation is rideshare applications. So when we would travel, we would fly to an airport, we would go from an airport either to our business meeting or to our hotel or some other destination. And how often do you pull up your phone and do a rideshare like Uber or Lyft or whatever your regional provider is? And the interesting thing is that experience is such that as soon as you book the ride, you know who your driver is going to be, what kind of car you will be driving in, what route you'll be taking, approximately how long it's going to take, and exactly what it's going to cost you. Back in the days when we used taxi, we had none of that kind of certainty in the way that we experienced a ride from one place to another. And because of how ubiquitous rideshare apps have become, they create a certain amount of fear and anxiety if you take a traditional taxi. And that is an example of how digital transformation has changed our everyday experience. And what digital transformation is really about is targeting points of friction in our experience and using intelligent technology to remove them, such that many of the applications we see today that are good instances of digital transformation, whether it's streaming media, whether it's visual maps, whether it's getting a ride, or whether it's the way that we actually purchase and consume music and other media forms, those apps have really not created any particularly new technologies for getting the job done. But what they've done is they've brought them together and created applications for those technologies that fundamentally change the experience we have between ourselves and the business that we are engaging. So with that extended definition, I want to talk about the compelling event that we have seen, and that is the digital tsunami. The COVID pandemic has forced a paradigm shift in the way we connect technology and automation to customer and user experience. And specifically, we have seen very clearly up until the point of about a year and a half ago, when we were adopting digital transformation initiatives in our organizations, automating a part of customer experience, figuring out a part of a process to change, adopting robotic process automation to handle a lot of the everyday task automation that we need. largely, those digital initiatives were in the early stages of adoption going into 2020 last year. But the COVID event and forcing us to work from home has put the accelerator on these initiatives, such that we have seen, according to analysts such as Forrester, we've seen the mass adoption of digital technologies as a way of doing business. And in fact, one of the populations that up until then had been the most resistant population to adopting digital approaches to doing business, and that would be the baby boomers, during the pandemic became the fastest adopters of digital transformation approaches to doing business. Whereas normally they would go to the bank in person to take out money or to do a transaction, when forced to do it online, quickly those users realized that this type of experience, which is just conducting day-to-day business, is best handled through automation. And as a result of that, according to Forrester, we saw an overwhelming overnight mass adoption of digital technologies among this population. So what did COVID do? It created a moment of clarity for digital transformation initiatives. First of all, it forced mass adoption of digital transformation initiatives, and organizations had to put their foot on the accelerator on those digital programs to make them work in a time when we had to work socially distanced, and when we had to work from home and in isolation. We had to rely on virtualization a lot more to conduct business. We had to rely on automation to get a lot of the back office tasks done for us. And COVID forced the mass integration of digital initiatives into the way that we do work. And it's forced us at the same time to reimagine automation process, assisting customers and employees in the way that they get things done. And that reimagining has come in the form of rethinking how the processes work and how we can use digital technologies to work with them. An important element of digital transformation is that it was already moving toward a paradigm of replacing a lot of person-to-person interaction in business transactions with person-to-device interactions, so that the virtual experience would become highly personalized. And what COVID forced us to do is to realize that we have to do that now. And it forced the mass adoption of these approaches in the way that we do business. And it forced the mass acceptance of these digital person-to-device interactions as the basis of conducting business and how our processes actually get run to support them. But a year into COVID, we are facing the phenomena of COVID fatigue, which has been widely identified from analysts such as Gartner, Forrester, and other industry leaders who've talked about the way that we become fatigued in the way that we are doing work in isolation. And specifically, analysts have pointed to the problem that the major driver of COVID fatigue is actually the technology we're using to try to stay connected. For example, how often did we actually use video conferencing, apps such as Zoom, leading into the pandemic? Not nearly as much as we rely on them today. And we have completely changed our behavior to offer ourselves up on camera and to put ourselves under surveillance as a way of doing business, because we're no longer face-to-face in an office. We're no longer face-to-face doing business. So we have substituted virtual interactions for face-to-face interactions. And the net effect of that is it has been to cause extreme burnout among users. And what that has created for users is a growing impatience for the way that a lot of technology works, the number of clicks, the number of screens, the number of steps it takes to get through things. Those are direct causes of the burnout and the fatigue that we are seeing among our user population. Finally, COVID burnout will force us to reimagine business from customer experience into the process. At no time before have digital initiatives actually given this much attention to experience, because we're dealing with a mass population of burned out users and customers. We have to think about experience and put the put experience at the center of how we digitize and how we automate our processes and our interactions. So now let's move on to one of the special challenges that digital transformation initiatives run into, and that is specifically the content-enabled process. And as we jump into this topic, it's important to understand that not all processes are created equal. In enterprise software applications where I've been for most of my career, process is something that virtually any enterprise application is concerned with. And we have seen the mass adoption of business process automation for the past 4 decades. First in the form of ERP as mass adoption, but then customer relationship management, supply chain management, buying management, content management, all of these 3-letter acronyms for these massive waves of automation and bringing in systems of record have all been about automating the way that we conduct business and automating certain business processes. But for the most part, those applications and those systems of record have run on data, specifically relational data. And we have built a world of business automation that is data-driven. But here's the problem. So many of our business processes and so many of our decisions are based upon actually using documents and other sources of content that knowledge workers actually have to read, understand, and make decisions on. And while these documents are a source of data to run process automation systems, there also is the need to understand the information, put that information in context. And by context, I mean put it in the context of the user's experience, the user's specialized skill, the user's knowledge in that particular area of the business in order to make decisions. And so our processes largely have been automated when it comes to having good data and good data sources. But when it comes to something such as content and documents, those forms of automation tend to break. And we approach documents and unstructured content as a workaround to the best practices that we have tried to implement in our organization in other ways. So the important thing here is to know how people in the process use the content before automating it. And many organizations have begun to wake up to that fact that content-driven processes don't work exactly the same way that data-driven processes work. So you need a different approach to be able to use them. So where is the friction in business today? Gartner pointed out about 25 years ago, and it still is the case, that of all the information we deal with in an organization and in business, about 80% of that information is unstructured information. Only about 20% of it is structured. And organizations have done a phenomenal job of automating the data-driven processes. But when you think about it, about 20% of the total process in an organization is actually fully automated, whereas the rest of it is still not automated. And polls of executives have found that many executives believe that about 5% to 20% of their business processes have actually been automated. The rest are not, because it involves dealing with a lot of information that is not in clean data form. So today we face the problem of content and the knowledge worker running into each other. So working in isolation with the tools that have been available at the time that we entered the pandemic, and trying to deal with the overload of information that's in documents, all kinds of documents. If you're in banking, it's onboarding customers and all the documents you need to onboard the customer. If you're in insurance and you're managing claims, it's the claims documents, it's the trailing documents that are part of a that are part of a claim that you have to settle. And you typically have to read these documents individually. And oftentimes this is what we refer to as swivel chair automation, where the claims worker in an insurance management environment has to bring up the claim, bring up the first notice of loss document, look at the information on one screen, swivel over to the other screen where the data systems are, key in the data, and then move it on. And then oftentimes that image gets archived fairly late in the process. So these processes largely have remained unchanged during the course of the pandemic. So let's turn now to an approach to helping to solve this problem, and that's the use of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has been around for a number of years, and it probably made its biggest popular introduction when IBM Watson won 3 back-to-back episodes against the all-time Jeopardy champions back in 2011, which now was 10 years ago. But then we've seen the mass adoption of other forms of artificial intelligence, such as the use of smartphones, voice-activated commands, etc. But what I want to talk about today is a specific area of artificial intelligence as it relates to how we can automate those difficult to automate business processes, specifically those processes that use content and on which humans rely on content to make decisions for their customers. So why artificial intelligence, or why AI, and why now? Well, we've seen movies promise it for the past 50 or 60 years, everything from 2001 to Terminator. And Terminator as this dystopian future is all about when we create artificial intelligence that is so sophisticated that it becomes sentient and begins to think for itself. And that's the reality that we were given in the media. It has been postulated by many theorists that the media reflect the reality we live in, which is true to a certain extent. But it's also been shown that the media forecast that the reality that we're about to experience. And there was an interesting documentary on this point that I saw years ago called Star Trek Tech, which looked at a lot of the things that happen on the bridge and in other places in the Starship Enterprise. And oddly enough, 30, 40 years later, those are the technologies that we started to use. And it's a good case of how fiction has influenced the reality and set expectations for it. So some of the fundamentals of artificial intelligence, or AI, have been around for years. Those include concepts such as natural language processing, or NLP, and I'll talk about that more in depth in a moment. Machine learning, assisted training, neural networks, and that is computer systems that are starting to think more and more like the way humans think. And those systems and those applications are focused on understanding content, specifically documents, corporate records, messages, emails, all those unstructured free-form forms of information that flow in and out of the business process all the time. And one of the approaches that artificial intelligence has pioneered for this particular kind of processing of content and pulling data and verifying data from the content is a concept known as named entity recognition and extraction. So in the old days of traditional OCR, we had the ability to read a document, extract fields of documents, and then create some applications, write some code that would tie all of those fields together. But now the technology has become a lot more intelligent and has the ability to look for a business entity in a document. For example, if you're a bank onboarding a customer, the customer is the entity you're looking for. And that customer is defined as the relationship among a number of different data fields and data entities. And it's looking for that relationship, composing it, and doing it on the fly in real time. That is what defines named entity recognition. And that was a major advancement in where optical character recognition technology has been boosted by artificial intelligence to give us what we call intelligent document processing. And in the process, AI has become more personalized. It's become personalized in anticipating how we use language and how we get things done. On your smartphone, how often do you rely on, and more often than that, curse your autocorrect for the way it's changing the words you're using, because it's trying to learn how you use those words and anticipate the next move to make it easier. And it doesn't work very well. But we see examples of this kind of artificial intelligence in everyday reality. That include the time when Watson won on Jeopardy. It includes Alexa, when we can go around the house and say, Alexa, turn on music, order more toner, or what are some good ideas for dinner? Or we can get Siri to text ourselves to get to the point. We can use photos, we can cluster by person, we can extract information on the photo, exactly when that photo was taken, the place it was taken, and some other associations can be automatically created with it. So the rise of assistant bots is the next step in digital transformation and AI-enabled automation. And we're seeing the growth of virtual agents and chatbots. How often do you make a customer service call for any reason now where you're going through an automated system and you might be using chat to interact with your vendor, your banker, your insurance company? You're using chat and you're talking to a chatbot. So we've already seen the adoption of these, but we're also seeing the adoption of smart objects and environments, physical embodiment, and also the growth of natural language processing, which is still, though it has been around for quite a number of years, is still in the early stages of adoption, specifically as it's used to manage documents. It's interesting to note how many processes are actually manual paper-based processes when it comes to documents. For example, in corporate accounting and finance, which is a business function that every organization has, every supply chain has, Level Research pointed out in October of last year that 65% of invoices and payment-related documents come in via mail or via email and are printed out in order to do the data entry. Imagine that, 65% of the documents that run a core area of business are still manually handled. So even though we have the ability to automate tasks and automate the processes that are tied to them, the processes for handling documents and content are still based upon a manual document processing paradigm, one where you're opening up a document and keying the information in. So you may have automated other parts of your process, but many organizations have not fully automated their paper-based processes, and that's the next frontier. So lately we have heard about the concept of the digital workforce, and there are many different definitions of it. If you hear presentations or if you hear discussions around robotic process automation or RPA, you're tending to think that digital workforce is the same thing as an RPA bot, and it is not. There are different classes of digital labor, and they are evolving toward smarter, more intelligent ways of doing work and getting work done. And those include the application of rules, moving to the processing of unstructured data and other information, and then finally bringing in machine learning and neural networks to make our systems smarter. And one of the critical capabilities in the digital workforce, which brings together artificial intelligence, forms of task automation such as RPA, process mining, and other insights to create what's literally a digital assistant for the knowledge worker. We see one of the critical capabilities as using AI to crack the code on unstructured text. For example, some of the most difficult documents to deal with, contracts, commercial leases, liability, regulatory filings, we now have the ability to automate using named entity recognition and artificial intelligence. And nowhere is this more important in business than in businesses that handle a lot of documents. This is a real example of a major organization who literally dealt with millions of pages of documents. And how do they get through all those documents? How do they handle those records when having that information can mean the difference between business running and not running? So the volume of documents can be staggering for any organization. We need to find a way to automate them. And I'll close with this final section that looks at how processes and humans, how processes interact with humans and content to make decisions. Some predictions that have been made. Digital intelligence is a key to successful transformation, and it starts with process. According to Gartner, by 2024, organizations will lower operating costs by 30% by combining hyper-automation technologies with redesigned operational processes. McKinsey points out that enterprises that do the best at automation will take time to consider how they redesign their processes. Already there's a relationship being noted here between automating and process. So automation is not simply about automating a process, it is about redesigning your process to make it work with the automation capabilities we now have. Forrester talks about optimum automation, bringing together machine learning and AI to make your automation processes smarter and to think more like humans. And again, the key to automation here is not necessarily replacing humans, but making your knowledge workers, those key humans who make decisions for on behalf of customers every day, making those knowledge workers smarter by using technology to become the assistants that help them with the tasks of organizing, making sense out of, and making decisions on the content that they deal with. At the core of automation is processes, and you can't understand processes if you don't have the right intelligence tools for understanding specifically the content and the knowledge work. When we meet with customers who are outlining their processes, the whiteboard, as you see here, is a classic way of outlining how a process works. But very quickly, the hard-written flow of tasks and workflow and exceptions meets some problems, and that is, as you see here, the sticky notes. And the sticky notes contain different exceptions. And more often than not, in a process, those sticky notes involve a particular kind of decision and a particular piece of content. In, for example, processing a mortgage or a loan, you need proof of identity, you need proof of residence, proof of income, and proof of employment. And where do those documents come into the process? Well, they can come in anywhere, and they create exceptions. So when many organizations attempt to discover and understand their processes, they use a lot of arrows and lines and sticky notes moving all around, because each one of those little sticky notes, each one of those documents, each one of those decisions creates an exception that disrupts the process and its normal flow. And so we have to use technology to be able to bridge that gap between that easily managed, easily automated processes and those parts that are not. So the digital intelligence approach that we're seeing emerge brings together process awareness, which includes process discovery, analysis, optimization, as well as ongoing monitoring and alerting on how that process is performing against your KPIs, against your other performance metrics. But increasingly, that process awareness is starting to look at not only the data, but using the data and the logs of activity to discover the human actions, what is taking place in the human actions, and the content dimension of that. And that brings in the content transformation element of digital automation and intelligent approaches to doing it. It allows us to capture the content as it enters the business process, not late in the business process, not as a workaround to the business process, but as it enters the process as a key point of decision. So digital intelligence really complements and extends the capabilities of the digital workforce that organizations are building to automate knowledge work and to help automate knowledge work being more effective. And digital intelligence is helping to enable both process awareness and content awareness for the purposes of transformation. And I'll close with this quote from technology writer Dan Newman, who wrote in Forbes about a year ago, that there is a key difference between optimization of process and transformation of process. As organizations seek to transform process to deliver better customer experiences, they have to rethink how the process works, not just add automation to it. And he points out, if you're pursuing tech adoption for the company's benefit, to save time, improve processes, avoid those day-to-day time sucks like returning the same emails over and over again, or looking for that invoice to process, or sorting through your sales lead, you're likely only optimizing an existing process. You're not transforming the process. So optimizing an existing process can only give you incremental improvement in that process. But being able to transform it radically, to rethink that process from the standpoint of what the approaches to automation, what your intelligence is able to show for you, that is how organizations, smarter organizations, are transforming their process. And it's all about bringing together people and experience, process intelligence, and content transformation, so that the last frontier of automation, which is expert knowledge workers with lots of experience, using that experience to make the best decisions for customers, bringing technology and automation together digitally in ways that enable those knowledge workers to be effective. And that is creating processes and automating processes for those workers, will help us post-COVID to make automation work in ways that it has never worked before. Thank you.
That is fantastic, Reggie. Thank you so much for that. We have lots of questions coming in, so I'm gonna maximize our time together here. I'm gonna ask you, Reggie, to click the button that says "Stop Showing Screen," so that we can the audience can see us in the bigger screen.
There we go.
Perfect. And I'm gonna invite Richard back with us. Richard, come on back, because you're gonna provide some insights to our audience as well. There are lots of different themes that have emerged here in terms of questions, and I'm gonna start with something that sets the stage for a lot of organizations, and I think you did a marvelous job of pointing that out, that in the world of advanced technologies, a lot of organizations are still dealing with very basic processes and paper-based processes, and the idea of automation has been around for a long time, but it has not become a reality for them. So the question is, with all the advances that we have seen across industries, what would be the best approach when it comes to adoption of new technologies for business value creation? What would be the first few steps, if you will, that organizations that have not done automation at scale yet should take to create the automation systems that create the most value for their organizations? What are some of the best practices, if you will, to get started on the right foot?
So Reggie, I'd be happy to give a first take on that, and then you can add to it. I would think that the first thing that organizations need to do is to understand their existing state. You need to understand your process and understand where the friction is, so that you can, before you do any kind of automation, you want to have an idea of where you want to go with that, not just repeating what's already there, but understanding where the problems are and what things can be done better as you're doing your automation. Reggie?
I would add to that process discovery is an essential first step. And it's like, I can't help think about the 12-step analogy. The first step in changing your life is recognizing you have a problem. And that has been borne out in experience and in the evidence that I've seen. Organizations that have adopted different forms of automation, for example, RPA, one of the things that they say over and over again, that perhaps the single most important factor in getting the return on investment is actually doing process discovery. And in automating document-driven processes, those same organizations have actually quantified it and said about 90% of the return on investment they've had for a document automation or content automation process or project has actually been in discovering the processes and realizing, number one, what they can automate and how to automate it. Number two, what processes just don't work. And number three, where does the process and where does that particular behavior need to change in order for this automation to work. And it's revelatory for organizations doing that discovery and doing it across the organization. But most importantly, it's not simply discovering the workflow and event A leads to event B, etc. Because the data now give us the ability to see more, and that is how humans interact with the process. What is the time on task that people spend, and what kind of activity are they doing? Are they spending a lot of their time chasing down a data field, for example, like finding a customer number, even though they're able to see it in the document? Simple things like that. People can spend a lot of time on it if their processes are broken.
Those insights are terrific from both of you. It's very common that people who work with technology present technology as a solution to problems, because when your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? But you show the depth of expertise and experience that you have to know that it's much deeper than that. And thank you for sharing that with our global audience. So absolutely, understanding which ones are your critical processes, and then understanding how they deliver value to stakeholders is critical and a non-trivial step. Let's assume that organizations have done a decent job at identifying those now, and now we are ready to start automating them. We went through and we streamlined them. We eliminated non-value added activities. We reduced non-value added activities, and we're ready to automate. Question now becomes is that people can get overwhelmed by the sheer number of technologies available nowadays, right? I mean, do I do RPA or process mining, or I implement NLP? And you can get into enterprise architecture type of approaches. Is there some sort of mapping, if you will, on how you approach automation in the best possible way? Once you decide you're going to automate, what are some technologies that are ready for prime time right now versus a bit of a hype that may exist around some of the technologies?
So I'll take a first crack at it. That I think that we've talked about process mining, which allows you to get a view as to what your overall environment looks like. The issue with that is that process mining is somewhat limited in that it only really works well with processes that are very standardized and repeatable. You hear us refer to process intelligence. This is really just an extension of process mining that replaces the reliance on a schema diagram showing you a picture of your operations with more numerical analysis. And as such, it works with all processes, regardless of whether they're ad hoc with almost no standard path, and every path is different. So once you have this ability to overall view what's happening within your environment and get down to the nitty-gritty details of the numerics of where things are taking long, where there are problems, you then have the ability to also define behaviors and see how these process behaviors relate to the results you're getting. Once you have this view in the process, that's when you have an understanding of what other technologies you need. So whether you're talking about being a part of a platform so that you've got content intelligence as a part of this, whether you're talking about using RPA, two of the areas that clearly are important to use along with your automation process, you have an understanding of how to leverage these areas. So for instance, RPA is something that gets discussed a lot, but you need the ability to not just choose what processes to automate, but to be able to understand what is the value of automation, not just in automating a given task, but in the overall larger process. How much of that task automation really help you to monitor the process, to use predictive analytics to be able to determine when a developing situation might lead to a problem and deal with it before it's a problem and take action. It's sometimes referred to as a control plane, a set of technology sitting outside of your various systems of record and users that can watch over this and take corrective action as necessary while this is still ongoing. Reggie?
I would just add a few things to that, is that once you understand your process and have identified the friction points, and typically the friction points occur with when when humans are in the process by necessity, because processes are designed as tools to help humans be more effective, especially in so many of the industries who will be presenting and interacting in this conference: banking, insurance, healthcare, and those organizations that rely on experience. When experienced humans have to make decisions based upon certain kinds of information, typically the process is not as well designed for that, and the approaches to automation can be deployed for enabling that. Robotic process automation, or RPA, can be used to automate assistant tasks like reading an email inbox to look for this particular kind of document and then route it or do some verification. But that also needs to work in conjunction with artificial intelligence that actually reads the document and understands it, and then can automate the decision making of the information that is revealed from those documents. All of that is now possible.
That is fantastic. We are out of time right now, but I have one quick ask from you. I mean, what you both and the whole team at Abby are doing in advancing the implementation of smart technologies that will create value is outstanding. For our audience, those of us who want to learn more about the Abby journey and what you're doing, what is the best way for us to connect with you and follow along what you're working on?
Well, we do have some follow-up resources that we will be distributing after this presentation. Of course, Abby.com provides a host of resources, not only understanding who we are, what we do, but also what our customers are doing and how our customers are solving these problems every day.
That is excellent. And I want to remind our audience that if you look under the handouts portion of the GoToWebinar interface, you have handouts that you can download right now to get additional information. But for now, Reggie and Richard, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with our global audience today. We're all better off as a result of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Reginald Twigg and Richard Rabin from Abby sharing their expertise on the journey of digital transformation and the use of smart technologies to create value in our businesses. Now we're gonna take a break, and at the top of the hour, we're going to bring another cross-industry expert, Kevin Clafley, who is the enterprise customer success leader for Signavio. He's gonna be here with us, and he's gonna talk about how to drive efficiency and customer excellence on your business transformation journey. Again, in his role as Signavio, he works across multiple industries around the world, seeing all that's happening with respect to best practices for efficiency and customer excellence on the transformation journeys of clients with very distinct business models. So we look forward to learn from his expertise at the top of the hour. And again, a reminder for you that you can download additional resources under the hands-out portion of the GoToWebinar interface. You can also check out under my name, José Pires, on LinkedIn, and you can ask additional questions. You can interact with our speakers. You can interact with myself, and you see the posting under my name on LinkedIn for Digital Process Automation Live. So for now, we're taking a break, and I'll see you back at the top of the hour. Thank you.